If we really want to experience that thrill of victory, then we've got to have organized practices. And to have organized practices, we must start by first asking some very basic questions. We're going to look at 4 of those questions today, and I think once you honestly and realistically answer those 4 questions, then you're ready to get into organizing the practice. But we have to ask those questions, and we have to honestly and realistically answer those questions. The very first basic question is, where are we? Now, that's a very simple question, but it's a very important question. Where are we in skill development? We've got to evaluate our team and see what level of skill development our team is at. Can they throw and catch? Or are they like many teams who have all kinds of problems just basically throwing and catching the ball? We need to know that. We may want to work on relays. Maybe we have a team who can execute perfect relays, and they're able to throw the ball from a left fielder into a shortstop into home plate and execute perfect relays. They've mastered the basic skills of throwing and catching. We need to know that about our team. Where are we? Can we throw and catch, or can't we throw and catch? That determines where we're going to start our work. You see, you have to coach players from where they are, not from where you wish they were or where they think they are. It's a very important statement. Let me repeat it, coaches. You must coach players from where they are, not from where you wish they were or where they think they are. The first step in organizing your practices is to evaluate your players, much like a doctor evaluates a patient who comes into their office or an accident victim who comes into the emergency room. You've got to assess the situation before you treat the problems. You've got to evaluate your players before you can correct any of the problems that they might have. Coaches need to just stand back for a while and watch their players. It may be that you'd like all of your players to be able to hit the ball well to the opposite field when that need arises. But you may have players who just have trouble making basic, consistent contact. They're swinging and missing the ball much more often than they ought to. You need to work drills that establish that consistent swing and basic contact before you start working on placement of the ball. Learn to coach players from where they are. Ask the question, where are we? And honestly answer that question. Then you progress to the point, where do you want to go? That's the second question we need to know an answer to. Where do we want to go? But we've got to first of all find out where we are. We can't realistically map a destination if we don't know where we are to start with. We've got to find out where we want to go, but we've got to know where we are. Now, it may be that you want to go to the point where your teams are able to execute the double play. And so you want players who are able to make the proper footwork, the pivots at the second base bag, and they can use 2 hands and quickly get rid of the ball as they execute the throw over to first base. But you may look at your teams and they have problems, the middle infielders, and that they're catching the ball too often with just 1 hand. Well, where you want to go is to the 2-hand reception of the ball. But you've also got to answer that question again, the first one, where are we? You've got players catching the ball with just 1 hand. So you need to work some drills to get them more consistent in using 2 hands to catch the ball so that they can throw it more quickly after they catch it. Where you want to go to is the proper execution of a double play, and you need to know that because the skill level of your players allows you to do that. But you've got to look at where you are and go from that point to where you want to be, the proper execution of the double play. The third question we need to ask is, how much time do we have to get there? We know where we are and we know where we want to go. When do we need to be there? You've got to look at your calendar. Find out how many days you have, how many times in those days you're going to practice, how long those practices are. Do we need to be ready by the first game with this skill? What about the middle of the season maybe? Or we've got to have it ready in time for playoffs, the end of the season tournament. You've got to look at the agenda, the schedule. When do you have to have certain skills developed? Maybe you need to be able to do relays by a certain point of the season, or a double steal, or whatever the skill might be, or the activity that you've got to be able to perform in a ball game, whatever it might be. What part of the season is it necessary to have that level of development ready for? Realistically, ask and answer that question by checking your schedule, by checking the calendar, and by referring back to those first 2 questions, where are we and where do we want to go? And finally, the fourth question that you've got to ask yourself is, what's the best way to get there? See, we know where we are, we know where we want to go, and we know how much time we've got to get there. Well, what's the best way? We've got a plan. It's been said that he who fails to plan is really planning to fail. And there's a lot of truth to that. you've got to have some type of a plan to get to your destination. Much like taking a trip. If you're going to go somewhere and you've got a destination, you've got a starting point, you know how much time you've got to get there, you take out a map and you plot a course. It's the same type thing you do with your team. If you want to arrive at that championship circle, if you want that thrill of victory, then there's a progression to that point. It may start off by learning the basic skill of catching a ball. You then may develop the skill of catching with two hands. You may develop the footwork so that you can release the ball more quickly with those hands after you've caught it. And so you work on progression until you've learned to execute the double play properly. The other skills are the same way. You work through those skills in a systematic way, developing them until you reach that championship circle of skill development. So coaches, as you organize practices, be sure to ask yourself those 4 questions. Where are we? 2, where do we want to go? 3, when do we have to get there? And 4, what's the best way to get there? Realistically answer those 4 questions and be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself in the answers so that you can reach that victory circle and get that thrill of victory that we all know that you want and your players want. Now, once we've answered those 4 questions, we need to look at the resources that we've got to help us get those questions answered and carried out throughout the season. So now let's take a look at the important resources you have available to you to conduct quality practices.